at what point does the food you eat become you? Because people are thinking of food as separate from them, right? If you eat protein, it gets broken down to amino acids. You take those amino acids and you repair muscle cells. It helps you with hormonal signaling. Like that stuff becomes you literally at some point. So was it ever really separate from you? And then at what point does it not become you anymore?
Hello and welcome to the Regenerative Design Podcast. I'm your host, Mathieu Mehuis, and in this show, I interview the leading authorities in the world of regenerative practices, people who do good and do well. Are you a person that cares about your environment and our planet? Are you a person that wants to leave the planet to our children to be something that we can be truly proud of? Something to enjoy for many generations to come. But are you also a person that believes we can do all of this and do good in business? Well, I have really good news for you. You're here listening to the podcast that is all about making our planet a better place and making your business more successful. Enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Regenerative Design Podcast. Today we have another amazing guest. His name is Parker Condit, and Parker is a health coach and certified personal trainer. He's actually worked over his career with many people, elite athletes, people that are in the NBA, also in the PGA Golf Tour. So he's been working with a lot of athletes, and he has now dedicated his life to helping people to become healthy and to live longer. And in that realm, he has founded his company, In Touch Health and Performance. So I'm very excited to have Parker on the show today. We're going to dive really into what does it mean to do regeneration for the planet and how can it impact our personal health, and then doing good for our personal health can have a positive impact on the environment. So I'm very excited about this conversation. Parker, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you. And thank you for the very kind introduction. And it's a pleasure to be on your show. And for anyone who's listening, we actually got introduced this past spring while you were doing kind of pre-promotion for your book, which came out. And you were a guest on my podcast. So it's fun to end up doing something reciprocal like this. So I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. And then we even got to work together for a bit. And we'll talk a bit about that later on in the show. But first off, I want to start to really know your whole backstory. Like you've worked with all of these elite athletes in the health and personal training industry. How did you start doing that? Tell me the backstory.
So living here in Scottsdale, Arizona, it's a very good training area. Just from a professional athlete standpoint, there are a lot of professional baseball teams that are based out of here for their spring training because half the league does their spring training here in Scottsdale. The weather makes it very conducive to having lots of pro golfers out here because you can play year round for the most part. Summer gets a little bit rough. And then you just get a lot of athletes that just like to live out here in their off season just because the weather is so good and you can train. So moving here from Colorado, I just kind of got plugged into a very good gym where I was exposed to a lot of professional athletes, which was kind of a dream of mine early on. Once I became a trainer, I was like, I want to work with the best of the best. I want to work with professional athletes. Having done that for a few years, I learned pretty quickly. I'm like, oh, that was more for my ego than anything else. It's like working with pro athletes, it's cool. And you say it to people and they're like, oh, that's amazing. But they're not that interesting to work with. Like they're already so good. And like you might work with them for a year to get just marginal increases in performance, which is cool because that's like, it's very challenging. You need to be very precise in your programming. You need to coordinate amongst their actual like team coaches and their in-season training to make sure you're kind of doing everything you can with them in their off season, or if they're training with you in season. But at the end of the day, like they're making $10 million a year for a reason. And they're probably going to be really good athletes despite what I'm doing with them, not because of what I'm doing with them. So it turns out it's like, I'm super grateful to have had that opportunity and I've taken a lot from it, but I realized I'm like, this is not really the demographic that I get a lot of fulfillment out of working with. But at that time, so working with a lot of golfers, I ended up working with a lot of older golfers as well. People who couldn't
Oh,
turn, they have a lot of pain. They're like, I can barely make it through a round. I'm
oh
crushed three
yeah,
days after just walking the course.
yeah.
So I found out working with like people who are like 55 plus, I was like, oh, like I can make huge strides with them. And
Uh-huh.
they're incredibly appreciative. And it just seemed like it was a better demographic that I was more suited towards. And it was also like more receptive to me. You know how you sometimes get a good fit? You're like, people self select towards you.
Oh
I
yeah.
found out it was like that aging population. I just have, I guess, more of a connection with them, more so than I do with people my own age or professional athletes who are generally younger than me. So that's how I ended up kind of getting into that aging population. And I'll pause there just to see where you want to take the conversation. But
No,
I've kind of gone down a pretty deep rabbit hole into the aging stuff.
I love that we will talk about more about it, but I love that you're so honest about like you could be here on the show bragging that you've worked with all the best athletes, and you did, and there was some value in it, but you found out you can have a bigger impact at a let's call it more mature age group of people because they're not old. And I think it's a very interesting topic to dive into shortly that people around the age of 55, 60, they kind of grew up with the narrative once you're getting into that age, everything goes downwards, right? So that's kind of like, even if we look at back at our own grandparents, when people were 60, let's say 50 years ago, that was already quite old. But now today, 60, you can still thrive in life. And actually, one of my own mentors, my Nikki Belu, he completely shifted his perspective as well. He was like a little bit overweight. He actually had always worked in the fitness industry himself, but he had the narrative like, oh yeah, I'm just getting 60. So it's just normal that I get a little bit overweight and I let myself go. And all of a sudden he caught himself and he hired some of the best coaches and he became like a bodybuilder in 2 years. So
Yep.
I love that you're aiming for that age group because the impact can be more severe, right?
How do you know, or where does Nikki live? Because that name is familiar. I'm not sure if it's from you. I feel like I've heard the name elsewhere.
He's from Toronto.
Okay. I think it might have been another guy I interviewed who is Canadian that knew him. The name just sounds too familiar, and I don't think it came from you. So just
Could
a
be.
quick.
He goes on a lot of podcasts. I know that. So maybe he has
Okay.
been on your show. That's part of
He
what I've
hasn't.
learned from him.
Okay. Yeah, he hasn't been on the show, but I'll look into that afterwards. Sorry, just
Nice.
taking a
No,
detour in
yeah,
the
he's a
conversation
great
already.
example of what he's done. And he actually wants to set an example for people in his age group. Like, guys, you're not at the, not, your life doesn't have to go south from here. You can actually become at the prime of, he even says now that at his age, he can be even in better shape and better health than when he was 30. So that's quite interesting as well.
Yeah, you can do a lot. There's a lot of it has to do with mentality as well. Because, like you were saying, a lot of people just have this expectation that as you're getting older, things are going to deteriorate, and that is true. Like that is the natural aging process. I think there's a lot of I'll say misguided messaging around the aging and longevity space to the point where I'm even hesitant to say longevity within my company messaging at this point, just because I feel like it's been so hijacked by sort of the biohackers of the
Oh
world,
yeah.
where it's like it's just a supplement, it's just these very obscure protocols in the biohacking community that it's like those things can work and all these things are rooted in some scientific basis, but it's
Yeah.
like that's true, comma, as long as you're doing all the main foundational stuff as well. Like you can't just do these supplement protocols and these obscure like red light, not red light therapy is not obscure, but like red light therapy alone is not going to be enough if you're not moving your body, if you're not loading your skeleton, if you're not feeding yourself in a way that's appropriate for your current and long-term goals. You're not prioritizing sleep, you're not managing your stress, you're not connecting with nature and the natural world. If you're not doing those things, taking enough NAD plus is not going to prevent you from getting older. And there is no preventing you from getting older. It's just hoping to help you maintain your goals and your lifestyle that you want to as you go through that aging process.
No, I agree. I think there's no quick fix that solves everything. It's you have to still do the work, and probably all the supplements and some of the things they do work, but only in combination with exercise and good nutrition. I think, in my opinion, these are the
Hmm.
two key things. I'd love to hear from your perspective, like for longevity, what are the keys to becoming old gracefully.
I will. We can go very deep, but I want to kind of lay out a framework for people first,
Yeah.
which will hopefully. And this is a model that I've sort of evolved my thinking around over the past few years. I used to think of there as being like six primary pillars of things or activities or parts of your life that you need to sort of prioritize. And not all of them are going to be filled up all the time, but it's just a way to kind of audit where you are along this process. So those would be sleep, nutrition, exercise, daily physical activity, stress management, and then also connection and basically your social support networks,
Community.
family, friends, things like that. Yep, exactly. I've since evolved that to keeping the first five as independent pillars, and they sit on top of that community aspect
Oh
where
wow.
if so like support, community, family, like having psychological, which is basically just a model for psychological safety, like feeling that you are not alone in this world, you are doing this together amongst a community and you have people that are going to support you. You don't have to do every aspect of your life by yourself. I've come to think that that's so important that it's now the foundation that all of those other five pillars sit on top of, or it sits beneath those other five. So it's the foundation. And within that, I think is your relationship to not only each other, but with nature as well. I'm having trouble finding a way where I think somebody can be truly healthy in like a fully integrated way with while being completely disconnected from nature. I don't know
Huh.
that that's possible
Interesting.
because I think if you're really disconnected from nature, you're going to be disconnected from yourself in some sense. You're not going to have a real connection to where your food's coming from. You're not going to have an appreciation for the footprint of how you're moving throughout the world. And I think that just gets reflected through every aspect of your life. And I've found that working with people trying to just get them reconnected, like the name In Touch came from trying to help people get more in touch with themselves and in touch with the natural world. Because as I've kind of done that, I have people prioritize getting in touch with nature again without even having to coach them through a lot of like anything relationship related. Everything just starts to improve if you just start with that foundational appreciation for everything the earth has to offer us. So that's, I'll kind of pause there and see
Nice. I
see
love
where
that.
you want to go.
So I think you sparked my imagination in the way that without the community, all of the other aspects are pretty much useless. And I think even in the work of regenerating our planet and doing good for the environment, the community aspect is key because it's essential. Like even for farmers, if they don't connect with their consumers, for other practitioners like yourself, the fact that you're basing your company on the foundation of community aspect to social aspect relationships, is that based on any research or is it your own personal finding?
So it's been a bit of both where I've definitely seen this where working with people, I can kind of go into that a little bit later where, just focusing on that community aspect. If you create a strong foundation for people, everything else just gets a little bit easier. But as far as the research is concerned, there was the study out of Harvard. It's the longest ongoing study on happiness. I think it started in the 30s or 20s. But they concluded that the biggest factor, contributing factor to happiness was the quality of relationships in your life. So close relationships to family and friends and maintaining those relationships. So they actually started it with this primary group of subjects. And like I said, it was in I think the 20s or 30s. And they studied them for so long, those people started having kids and they continued to follow the kids as well. So you're actually getting this multi-generational study out of a pretty reputable at reputable university in Harvard, where they're saying like the quality of your relationships is like the biggest driving factor to your happiness. So I found that. And then I was just I'd been having this feeling that in America, there's so much focus on the individual where I was like, I feel like a shift back to more community is going to be beneficial. So I had a lot of these like these thoughts were sort of coalescing into each other to kind of come up with the basis of this company of it needs to be about getting back in touch with yourself, back in touch with community, back in touch with the natural world, where if that is the focus, that's the foundation, it's going to make my job a lot easier, improving somebody's sleep, right? If people have psychological safety of feeling like they have a strong community and they're in community of like-minded people and supportive people, they're going to be less stressed. They're going to be able to fall asleep a little bit faster, not thinking that they need to do so well in every aspect of their life individually because there is no support underneath them where they need to be. And maybe this is a good way to think of it, where if you don't have any support, you need to have excellent sleep. Your nutrition needs to be so on point. You need to be incredibly strong. You need to have a ton of energy because you have no one else helping you out. You need to be so good at managing your stress because you have to do everything yourself. You have no one else to rely on. So it's like, if you don't have that community foundation, you can do it. You just need to be crushing those other 5 aspects.
Oh, wow.
Because you're going to have to be doing it all on your own. But if you have a really strong foundation, like you don't need to be doing everything yourself, which like I think it lowers the demand on those other sections, which are sleep, nutrition, exercise, daily physical activity, and stress management. So that's how I think of things.
That's an interesting train of thought. So then for me personally, I'm thinking, okay, I definitely have a community, but I'm also working a lot, like many long hours. Um, is that part of your clients as well? Like people that are real entrepreneurs have limited time. And I think for the listeners here that are both good in business and doing something good for the environment, it may be sometimes difficult to be fully immersed in community. Well, this podcast is part of creating the community, I think. But what's your take on people with limited time to spend time with community or family or friends?
I think you'll find that the more time I'm going to use the word invest in community, the more filled up you're going to be and the more efficient and energized you're going to be for everything else you have to do, or not even have to do, you get to do, where you want to do good work in your landscape design, in moving people towards regeneration and towards educating the masses through this podcast, through your book. Like you have a lot of things that you want to do. But if you feel depleted and you don't have that support, it's going to be harder. It's going to feel like a slog where a lot of things feel like tasks where their energy drains on you. But if you get filled up by your community and you have that support, whether it's, hopefully like a podcast like this is like a fun interaction for you and you don't feel drained by the end of it, hopefully.
I loved it.
And that, you have these things throughout the week you get to look forward to. And then you're energized. You're kind of like amped up afterwards to do more of the work that might not be fun. I'm sure you have a ton of administrative work that you have to do that you don't love, but it's part of owning a business. But you have these other parts of your life that help keep your sort of glass filled up, if you will.
Yeah, I agree like fully that I work a lot, but sometimes on the weekend I take some time off. I spend time with my godchild. I go walk with my friends on the beach, or if I can travel, go surfing. That's my biggest passion. And that's all part of this community aspect. But also now that I think about it, part of in my job as well, I'm building my community. Like I'm teaching people how to design, create their own garden. Even though these are clients, they're also my family now. They're like, I'm teaching them, I'm see them making success. So I think there's also ways to incorporate it in the business to create my own community of people that are like-minded and want to go to the success. And that's actually how we met. So I totally enjoyed teaching you everything about regenerative design. So we'll get there in a minute. I still would like to know more, like how do you incorporate the aspects of community in your business? Is that like you recommend it? Do you create a community, or how do you deal with that with your clients?
A lot of it is just awareness, because a lot of people don't. I guess it's the idea of like introspection or just self-reflection and becoming much more aware of like the structure of your life, where a lot of people just kind of go through their lives and they're like, well, I know I need to do X, Y, and Z for my career. I need to invest for my retirement. I kind of invest this time into my relationship and into my marriage and into my kids. But they don't necessarily, a lot of people don't necessarily have a sort of framework for their overall health. So teaching them that framework just brings awareness to this variety of things. And then for me working with them, it's just a framework for people to self-analyze, and it gives them a way to very honestly audit themselves. And that's kind of what I have them do. It's just, I do a very long intake and consultation with my clients, where we just spend a lot of time talking about these various aspects of their life. And then I don't necessarily grade them on a quantitative measurement, like, oh, you're a 70 out of 100 for your sleep. But, you know, if somebody is very honest with themselves, they're like, I don't really prioritize sleep. You know, I like having a few whiskeys before bed. I like watching the news before bed. My phone's in the room. And if they average 6 hours of sleep per night, right? Plenty of people can do it. You can do it, but it's not going to be ideal. And if it's something they want to change, then I help them create habits around sleep hygiene and how to structure their sleep and how they kind of structure the hours leading up to bed in a more advantageous way. But that's if it's something they want to change. If they're like, I don't really want to mess with that, we're like, okay, we can look elsewhere. We can, either way, they're working with me, so they're going to be working on their exercise. I'll have that taken care of. That's not really a concern for them. Nutrition, very important. If that's an area they want to address, I'm happy to go there with them. So it's just looking at these various aspects and like where are people willing to pull the lever to change their lives? Usually hiring me, they're very willing to do something with exercise. Nutrition is an easy segue off of that, because generally they're going to be sore. They're going to be a little bit extra tired. They're going to want the extra energy. They're going to learn how to recover faster from these workouts. So nutrition is easy to get on that. I'm pretty obsessed with walking. So that's what I count as daily physical activity. And I count that as being different than exercise. So that's why I make it a whole separate category. So I can generally get people there. And then, you know, relationships and community, that can be tricky, but that's where the art of coaching comes in. And you need to understand where somebody is, understand their family history, their family dynamics, see if you can help guide them gently towards kind of creating better relationships in their lives. But, you know, it's subtle, it's nuanced. I'm not shoving stuff down their throat, because, you know, if I do that and I force them to do it, once they're out on their own, they're probably going to reject it. And they might even swing back further in the other direction as like this rebound effect.
Nice. This is great information. I think I'd love to understand more from your perspective. Like, I see two things we could talk about. One is the area, what you believe that you can combine your base, the community, and as much pillars as possible in. So we'll talk about that later. First off, I want to go into the rabbit hole of nutrition, because I feel like it's such a difficult topic, and I'd love to hear from your perspective. Because if you look at influencers, people talking in the news everywhere, some people say you have to be vegan, others say you have to be fully meat eaters, and others say you should do this, do that. So I'd love to hear your take on nutrition, if you want to go into that rabbit hole.
Yeah. Let's see. This is we could probably spend a lot of time on this, and maybe we should, because nutrition's a super nuanced part of this, where exercise, most people don't have a huge emotional ties to exercise, right? Like, nobody has an emotional tie to doing deadlifts or squats, and they have some sort of like relation to their grandmother, but like their grandmother's casserole dish or some sort of food that you kind of grew up with in certain ways. There's much more emotion and culture tied to food. Yep. Which is why it's trickier. And I think this is a part of the conversation around nutrition that gets lost, especially on social media. For years, so I'm also a certified nutritionist. For years, I still never even touch nutrition in a very specific way, because I'll make this distinction as well. Here in the US, the term nutritionist is state by state dependent, but it's very different from a dietitian, where to be a registered dietitian that's licensed, it's at least a master's, it's 1,000-hour internship. So we're talking like 6 years of school, about a year-long internship, hands-on, and state licensing. So that's to become a registered dietitian. You can become a nutritionist over a weekend online. So the difference between those two terms is enormous, and most
Yeah.
people conflate them just because the average person doesn't know the difference. So dietitians, they're very, very well trained. Nutritionists, not necessarily. It's not to say all dietitians are good and all nutritionists are bad. Like they're good and bad on both, but the difference is worth discussing. So anytime somebody needs a nutritional intervention,
Yep.
I'm always referring out to dietitians. But for people who just need general education around nutrition and a better understanding of macronutrients, better way of how to structure meals, that's where I can do some education with people. But I think there's so many aspects that need to go into that nutritional conversation. And I think a huge one is cultural, because there are lots of cultures, like you probably know about the low carb fad, right? Oh, carbs drive glucose and insulin and you got to go low carb. It's like, well, what about for people that are coming from cultures that have just very carb heavy diets? It's like, are you
Yeah.
just
Look
telling
at
them to
Italy.
just
People are
rip?
skinny in Italy, and they're
Right. So
mostly
you're just
eating
telling people
carbs.
to right. So you're just telling people to like rip these like this macronutrient out of their cultural background with no appreciation for like what that's going to do to other aspects of their life and like how that's going to make them interact with family. Like how is that going to affect their community?
Oh yeah.
Can they not go out to restaurants with people in the same way they would be able to? So I think there's a lot you can talk about with nutrition, but I think it has to be based with a cultural understanding. It has to be based with an understanding of the person's relationship with food, because a lot of people have very, I don't want to say unhealthy, but they have tricky relationships with food due to past traumas as coping mechanisms. There's like lots of unusual, or yeah, there's lots of like different relationships people have with food. I happen to be very lucky in that I have like a very agnostic, almost disconnected relationship with food, where I can treat it more like something that's just fueling my body. But at the same time, I probably because of that, I probably lack some of the connection with people in my life over
Community
food.
part. Yeah.
Yeah, where like I can't connect over food with as many people as the people that grew up like with this deep emotional bond with food. So there, there's drawbacks, and it's there's a lot to it. But I think to give your listeners something tangible, most people are under consuming protein. I would say that who have goals for increasing muscle mass, for the goal of losing weight. When you lose weight, a fair amount of it generally is muscle mass. Muscle mass is incredibly important to maintain for your metabolic health. It's one of the primary ways that you store glucose. So if you have blood sugar running around your bloodstream, you only have two places you can store it. One of them is in the liver. The liver is finite. It can only hold so much. But the more muscle mass you have more basically storage units for that blood glucose. So the more storage units you have, the more glucose you can clear from the body, and the faster you get at clearing that glucose from the bloodstream.
Interesting.
And for anyone that doesn't know, high blood sugar, that's kind of what ends up leading to pre-diabetes, type 2 diabetes, things like that. And that
And
puts
that's
you at
all
increased
related
risk for.
to carbs, or like the processed carbs, we could call them.
That's so processed carbs will increase your blood sugar. And that's a normal response. Even if you if you have normal, if you're not pre-diabetic or diabetic or anything like that, when you eat carbs, your blood sugar should go up because you're putting glucose into your body. So a normal response is the blood sugar going up, but then it's coming back down. So there's a lot of fear around blood sugar spikes, but that's a normal response once you eat carbs. So I don't want people to be scared of that.
I think,
Trying to think of like,
no, I agree. I think it's important to take everything nuanced, and I've heard some theories. I don't know if they're right, but that, and I'd love to hear your perspective on it. That genetically we all come from different descendants. Some people that were more linked to the hunter gatherers. So hunter gatherers would generally eat more fruit and meat, and then other people who have already genetics that are, let's say, more adapted to the farming lifestyle, which started 2,000-3,000 years ago. They can eat better milk, they can eat better grains, all these stuff that only came in our diet later on. Even there's a theory that there's a whole group of people that didn't survive in the one of the cold ages in Europe, because they couldn't digest milk. There was all of a sudden it became really cold. Not much was growing, so people had to go and eat or drink milk over the winter. And some people couldn't cope with it, so they pretty much disappeared. So there was a whole group of genetic people that can handle milk very well. But then we're like, I guess if we try to trace back all of our ancestors, it's pretty much everybody has lived on all over the world. So you're a mix of everything, and that you. I don't know if you can figure that out. Have you find any research if you can find out what background you have from an ancestral perspective to adapt your diet?
I bet you can do that. I'm a little bit hesitant of. I'm hesitant
How
of
effective it
encouraging
is?
people to. Yeah, and also how good the interpretation of genetic data is. It's not to say I don't think it matters. I think it matters a lot. I think you can figure it out based on kind of experimentation and just
Exactly.
observing kind of what's happening. And this
Yep.
is where like getting in touch with yourself. It's like becoming more aware of what your body's telling you.
Oh yeah.
Where you're absolutely right. Some people are much more carb tolerant. I'm lucky. I happen to be one of those people. I can consume a ton of carbs, and I can store it pretty well, and I can just use it for energy later. Other people have much lower thresholds. Some people are much better at tolerating fat, based on grow, a lineage in very cold environments, right? They're going to be much more fat adapted. Where if you were to give that diet to somebody who grew up closer to the equator, they would blow up. Their lipids would be all over the place. They'd have a terrible response generally, because like that's not what they kind of grew up, and that's not what their lineage kind of delineated for them. Another interesting thing that just kind of jogged my memory was the fact that like past traumas can affect multiple generations. So famine, for example, people that endure a famine, it'll be two generations that are going to be more susceptible to diabetes afterwards.
Well,
Because
so,
like when you go through such severe food scarcity, your body has a proclivity to go towards food storage and calorie preservation. So you're just gonna store food very readily, and you're gonna store glucose as an energy
wow,
source very readily. But yeah, so like
that's
going through
wild.
something severe in your history is going to affect not only you but your kids as well.
Wow.
So yeah, that's why I'm like, oh, there's so many factors to nutrition, and then you can get into the environmental aspects of it, where if you want to be lower footprint, you go vegan, but it's hard to get enough protein in that sense. And I think that whole conversation is like, I'm on my way to becoming a vegetarian, but I think it just takes time, and like the person needs to be in the right place in their life to kind of make that transition. Like there's a
Oh
book
yeah.
behind me called Eating Animals. I read that 7 or 8 years ago, and that book alone, just the pure contents of it, I was like, I could be vegetarian now, but I wasn't ready. So 8 years later, I'm like still kind of making my transition now. And I think maybe in 3 or 4 years, I might be vegan. I'm not sure, but I think it's one of those things where you can't be like, oh, people should just be vegetarian or people should be vegan, where if they're not in a place where it aligns with them and it makes sense for them, I think it can be a very stressful endeavor to make a big change like that.
This podcast is brought to you by the Garden of Your Dreams Masterclass. Are you struggling with finding the right tools and tricks for your garden? Are you lacking the confidence to be a self-sufficient gardener? Do you sometimes get overwhelmed by the lack of knowledge and time you have to actually do gardening? Then the Garden of Your Dreams Masterclass is for you.
Oh yeah, I agree. There's no first of all, it's different for every person, whatever their preferences is, not only like from taste, but what copes well with their body, and probably taste and what copes well with the body is even linked, except for sugar, I would say. It's very addictive. But
Sugar always tastes good.
and apparently it triggers the same cells in your brain as you take cocaine. So it's as addictive as cocaine, apparently. So I don't
I can
know.
see that.
So, but yeah, I think it's incredible what you mentioned about this, also the generational impact that it can have. So also thinking like even as a legacy, like if you take charge of your personal health, you eat well, whatever that is for you, that is going to have impact on your children and even their children now. So I think that's quite astonishing to know this genetics that change over a lifetime. And
Yeah, not only that, but I also think just the upbringing that you grow up with of like how your parents cook and eat and their relationship to food. I think that translates incredibly to what you end up doing as an adult. So like that's all stuff that I try to tease out with people in the intake and the initial consultation with them to understand like, oh, is there a wide variety of foods that you were fed as a kid? If that's the case, generally they're going to be a little bit more flexible with trying new things. But if it's like kind of a strictly, oh, I grew up mostly meat, like meat and potatoes or meat, potatoes and peas, it's like they're going to be a little bit more structured generally. So it's all just information on how you can try to move and influence people's decisions and relationship with food.
yeah, I think this is very interesting to see how it evolves from person to person, and even like however their emotional connection to food is, that can have a huge impact on changing them if change is needed. So that's quite interesting. I never thought about that. Now let's take it a step further into the nutritional or health aspect. I think, and we talked about it in our class as well, that there's a massive thing that is overlooked in this whole discussion of what is good for you and do you have to eat meat or not meat. Like, I think there's another aspect about the way the food is produced. Can you talk a bit more about what your perspective is on how any product is produced and what the impact is on our personal health?
Yeah, so I don't have great research on this, but I can kind of go by feel, and I think it's just kind of logical, right? Where if food is grown in a more intentional way and a more, I don't know if loving is the right way, but I think intentional is a good way to put it. If the food is grown in an intentional way and it's not being mass produced, and if you think of mass produced food, just think of corn, where you're just driving through the middle of America and you could just drive for 50 miles and it's just cornfields on both sides of the road. Like that's mass produced, right? The
With a
the
ton of
farmer there,
chemicals.
it's not to speak badly of that farmer, but it's like, do they have a lot of intention behind each ear of corn there? Probably not. But, small town, like small farms in New Jersey where they've got an acre of corn and they've got a variety of other food that they're growing on that farm where, it's getting rotated, it's regenerative in nature. I feel like that is just better in, again, like I can't quantify this in a research way, but where when you're growing food in accordance with how nature would kind of go through natural cycles, I just think it's going to be better than just forcing one thing to be grown here repeatedly. And if the earth is not cooperating, we will just figure out how to augment the chemicals to make it work, where it's just incredibly additive on the front end, it's extractive on the back end, and it just keeps deteriorating the quality of the soil. I think the quality of the food goes down, and it would just repeat that year after year after year on the same plot of land, the same monocrop over and over and over again. Again, I can't point to something where I say like this ear of corn is better than this ear of corn. I just think the one where it's grown in accordance with the natural cycles of the earth is going to be better.
Oh yeah, I fully agree with you. I think the most of the food that's produced globally, and also again, not to speak badly about farmers, they're kind of been pushed into that corner. But most of the food, and even unfortunately now, evidence is showing that organic food included is still a long way from what we should be eating, because even in like just to look at the conventional way, there you have chemicals that are being sprayed. It's even questionable if the residue of chemicals has an impact, or people are questioning it. I'm definitely not questioning it. It does have a direct impact, I think, when you when you eat food that has glyphosate on it. That's kind of a no-brainer. But what's more important even is that the food that's being produced in such a way, it's kind of artificially kept alive. So they're giving nitrogen, they're spraying things to avoid it having diseases. They put other stuff just to kind of keep it alive and keep it growing. And then there's the whole GMO modified crops, which is another crazy way of producing food. But the aspect that is forgotten is that the plants are not fully healthy themselves. So it's quite logical to think like if plants grow their whole life, just as humans when they grow, if they're not healthy throughout the life, do you want to consume that yourself? So that's where now more and more evidence is showing, even in organic, because in some cases in organic they're even using chemicals that are like they are stated as organic, like for example copper, but in the application of copper it can be even more toxic. So still nobody, well, the whole conventional and organic, and not to say again, I think there's a lot of organic farmers out there that are doing their very best and that are doing already way better, and then some are doing really good. But I think that's where the regenerative aspect comes in, where we have to look at how can we produce healthy soil, healthy plants, healthy, and then healthy nutrition is like the consequence of it. Like the research is really showing that the nutritional value of produce that's produced in such way, including meat from cows that graze pasture lands that are healthy, that the nutritional value is so much better. Not to speak of like the microorganisms that might be on there that are beneficial for your gut as well. So I think, in my opinion, there's a lot to say about it. But I'd love to hear from you how you got actually intrigued about regenerative farming and how you got in touch with it. How did you first came about it?
I think it was originally, I was trying to find better sources of meat. And I think I just wasn't happy with the cuts of meat that I was getting. And I think that book, Eating Animals, had a big part of that, because you learn a lot about factory farming, which is pretty frightening. And I do want to make a note on like the public health standpoint, where we're kind of speaking things from terms of ideals. Like in an ideal scenario, yes, everything is regenerative. Everything is coming from better sources. But from a public health standpoint, especially in the US, it's more of a systems issue of like, why are these systems in place and how do we change them? Because like for a lot of people, like I don't want to put a percentage out there, but there's a big amount of food scarcity or food insecurity, even here in the US, where it's like people are having trouble just getting enough calories if they don't know where their next meal is coming from. In that instance, like the difference between organic and non-organic or grass-fed versus not grass-fed, it's more of a price and availability issue. And it's like they just need sustenance. So at that level, it's like we have enough food here. We produce more than enough food. Like 40% of it goes to waste, I think. So we have enough food, but we have these systems in place that are disproportionately providing high quality food to some people, exceedingly low quality food to others. There are food deserts. So there are big systems issues in place when it comes to a public health standpoint. So I want to make that distinction between that and the ideals that we're sort of talking about. But getting back to the idea of regenerative, I think I was just looking for better sources of food for myself. You know, there's lots of like regenerative farms where you can order like a quarter cow or just like these packages that you can just keep frozen. And I think that was my first introduction to it. And then I started reading a little bit more about how regeneration affects soil quality in a very positive way, sort of the blending of animals and like the crops, and how, you know, the droppings from the cows can help, you know, refuel the soil. So I just kind of got down that rabbit hole, and it was just one of those things where if you're looking into nutrition and that's not coming up, it probably needs to be a bit of a broader search in the realm of nutrition. So I'm not sure when exactly it started, but it's just been one of those ideas that is there, kind of looked into it, went away. And any idea that I keep coming back to, like over years, I'm like, this is probably something I need to grab onto at some point and take a little bit more seriously. And then luckily happened to start a podcast, got in touch with you. I was like, oh, this is a very interesting conversation. And it was much more in depth than I knew. So like, I think talking to you is the first real deep dive into it that I'd had.
Nice. Yeah, I appreciate that. we can talk about it more later on. But I first would like to hear from you, like in your work today, is there ways that you can incorporate that aspect of leading people to it, like not forcing them, but talking about regenerative food, about connecting with farmers, to go out to farmers market? Is that something you incorporate in your work?
Yeah, it's all part of the conversation. Like, I don't have a structured health coaching lesson on it because it's all about, I'm lucky to be in a position and the people that I work with where we spend a lot of time together. So like a doctor only has 20 minutes with you, maybe every 6 months or whatever it might be. I'm lucky to potentially have 3 hours a week or more with some people. So I have a lot of time. So I can really get sort of ingrained in their lives. And this is one of the things I'm really trying to encourage to other personal trainers and health coaches out there, where we have so much time relative to other providers that I think we need to be taking more advantage of it and not just making kind of bullshit small talk. It's like, yeah, you can do that throughout the sessions, but you've also got somebody's ear for an hour. It's like you can really start shifting them in a particular direction. So it depends on where
huge.
the person is.
I would like to jump in how huge this is, because I never thought about it like as looking at the healthcare system in a broader sense, because I'm featured in one of the documentaries that's going to be releasing soon. It's called The Cure, an inside job. And there's all kinds of practitioners, and they also say, like, how can we take off pressure from the actual doctors that they are key to the healthcare system, but they're just so overwhelmed with everybody coming to them with all kinds of diseases. Whereas if people would work with other healthcare practitioners like yourself, we can keep the masses away from going to what should be the final step in your if you get ill or if you're diseased. Like, going to the doctor should actually be your last step. Maybe there's ways you can change your diet, start exercising, find community, like all the work that you do, so that we can reduce the pressure on the healthcare system. Because there's just, as like since COVID, there's so many people that are ill, and there's not enough doctors and nurses to handle that. So I think in that sense, your work is like essential in this healthcare shift.
Yeah, it's definitely the case where there's definitely a shortage. There's shortage in basically every aspect that you're talking about. So it is going to be, there's like in the US, there's a clear delineation between, I guess I would call it like licensed healthcare professionals and then like the ancillary everyone else. Like, health coaches aren't necessarily licensed. They can be. You can get a state board for health coaching, but a lot of them are not. Personal training is not a licensed thing. It's certified. Nutritionist is not a license. It's certified. Acupuncture, that's licensed. But like these sort of ancillary outside of, like, when you think medical, you don't think of these things. And I think there needs to be a much better integration of that non-medical and medical realm. And I think we're moving towards that. I think we're just in a phase right now where we're in kind of the figuring it out phase, where, as I'm sure you've seen online, there's a lot of, from the ancillary non-medical side, there's a lot of messaging of, oh, big pharma is trying to get you, big medical is trying to get you. And like, that might be true, but that type of language is not going to help you coordinate with that person's doctor, right? If they look you up and your page is just anti-medical, anti-pharma, anti-medicine, anti-doctor, why would they work with you? And they're not gonna have a good relationship with you. And that does not actually help your client. So it's not to say those things aren't true, but like, if your entire business is built off of bashing big pharma and bashing these other things, like, you need it. It seems like political, right? Where it's like, you need to work with people across the aisle. Like, if you're not willing to for the benefit of your clients, and like, what are you doing?
Yeah, exactly.
So I think we're in the phase right now. Sorry, I was going to say, I think we're in the phase right now where we're figuring it out. There's a lot of, the medical community is trying to like push back against that, in that there is a lot of bad information coming out there from the ancillary providers. The ancillary providers are pushing back against pharma and big medicine.
Providers? What is that? I don't know.
Personal trainers, nutritionists, health coaches, influencers, things like that.
So there's a lot of scamming, you feel, or like just people that are not.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Fear sells very well. And influencers are awesome at selling fear.
Yeah, that's an interesting.
But it's like, I was going to say, like, if you really want to like help people, like you can't discard their doctor. You need to work with their doctor, and you need to build a good relationship with them. Because if you and your doctor can work together and actually like both of you working towards a common goal for the client, it's going to go much better. But if you can't build that relationship, it's going to be really hard to do, because you're going to be fighting the doctor's going to be fighting you, and then the client is in the middle trying to figure out who to actually listen to. Like that's worse for them.
And then they still have to decide what food to buy. And then they go to the supermarket, and then they're even more overwhelmed. Like, geez, there's all these different types of food. What should I buy? Like,
right. Yeah.
I luckily have also a nutritionist and a health coach, and we just set out my plan. So for me, going to the groceries, it's very straightforward, and I don't have to get confused. So, but what I really like about your perspective here is that you're saying like, okay, parts of the, let's call it the traditional healthcare system, which is mostly the doctors, they're looking at this new emerging industry, which apparently it's like, just to give an example, the supplement industry is one of the fastest growing industries in the healthcare system, which also points to like, okay, what are we actually consuming? The normal things, they don't have nutritional value. So maybe we should change the way our food is produced and go more towards regenerative food, so we don't need all those supplements. But it just shows like what a big demand there is for people that want to live a healthy lifestyle, because people want to have this better health, better life. And so the healthcare, the traditional healthcare system is looking to this new arising industry, like what the hell is happening? Like, a lot of is like just confusing, and a lot of is scam. And then the other way around, the let's call it the biohacking industry. And not to talk bad about biohacking, I think there's a lot of great value, but just to give the baby a name, is that area is looking to the traditional healthcare system, thinking like, yeah, they only want to sell pharma and pills, and and their doctors, they're all part of the COVID conspiracy, whatever. So, and what you mentioned is like, no, there's no point of doing that. It's not going to resolve the issues of your clients, or in general, people that want to live a healthier life. We have to look at them individually and support them from both ways. Like, I agree with you that the traditional healthcare system has saved many, many, many lives across like the last 50 to 100 years. People are living like so much longer, and that's because of the traditional healthcare system. Now, we might have gone a little bit too far, that we think we can fix the health just by getting another medication or another supplement or another thing. And I think then your work is coming in to help people to, okay, just go back to the basics: nutrition, exercise, and then finding your community and all the other aspects of your business. So yeah, I think it's a huge added value to society, to the planet. And then now that you're knowing how to do regenerative farming, I'm very excited to see where this will go with incorporating that in your business. So I'd love to hear more now from your perspective. What was like your eye opener when you started to learn more about regenerative agriculture and the whole notion of how the planet works? Because that was the base of our work together.
Yeah, I think if you just look at it, or I think I looked at it from, I'm like, okay, I'm just learning a new system, right? If you think of regeneration, and it's not a new system, it's the oldest system there is, right? It's the system of how nature works, where you kind of explained to me the process of what happens when bare ground is exposed, either from a fire or a flood or a slide or something like that. How the first thing that comes in are the weeds, or sort of like the invasive species. And it's just something to cover the ground. They grow roots very quickly. They don't need much nutrients. And that's like, so like, that's why when people who are constantly like tilling their gardens, you're essentially always exposing bare soil, and you're always going to be getting weeds, because it's the first thing that happens in like the first 2 years of kind of growing that. Then the next phase is understanding like, oh, certain types of grasses will start to grow. So it was just getting a really good understanding of how nature works. And then once you understand how nature works, you start to see, be like, oh, there's lots of very ancillary considerations. You can't just look, right? We're not just planting a seed and growing something, harvesting it, waiting for the off season, and then doing it again the next year. Like that's a very contained, small model. Regenerative agriculture is much broader. So it was basically just like, how do I build, taking it to like my business? I'm like, how do I build a business that is looking at a much broader scope of health, and not just health, but like people's relationship with the world, with themselves. And I think it was just that mindset shift of, you know, a traditional view of personal training, I guess like a limited view. And it's not to say it's bad. Like this is exactly how I started. It's like people come in, they lack strength, they have some pain, they get out of breath too easily. So I'm going to work on those things. I'm going to use my skills as in my expertise as a trainer to address those things. I'm going to get them strong. I'm going to help them get out of pain, and I'll build a cardiovascular or cardiorespiratory system to a point where they can walk up the stairs and they're not going to get out of breath. And that's great. Great to be able to get that outcome, but there's so much more that you can influence. And if you just take a broader view, you can start seeing these opportunities. Because as I mentioned before, you have so much time with these individuals. It's like, how can we really get the most out of the hour that I have with this person, and not just making sure they have a good time and they get stronger and they feel good when they leave the session, but like really trying to drive them towards what I think is a better system or a better model for life, which is sort of living in a regenerative way. And that's how that was like my initial thought process of like expanding my mindset around how do I build a business that I really want in the world.
Nice. Yeah, I love that. And that's how it actually fits in greatly with this podcast. Like, how can we do something good for the world and do great in business as well? So I think I'm very curious to see where that will lead you in integrating the regeneration aspect. You're already doing it. Like, if we look at it from even a cell structure of our bodies, our bodies. I've heard this. You have to correct me if I'm wrong, but that our whole body is regenerated in 7 years. Is that something that is correct, or?
It's not like every 7 years, like a flip
Not a switch like over time. Yeah.
No, it happens at a variety of intervals, right? So like our red blood cells, for example, on average turn over every 90 days. So if you've ever had an HbA1c test, which is like a trailing running average of your blood glucose for the past 3 months, it's like that's why it's taken every 3 months, because your red blood cells turn over every 3 months. But the longest cells in the body take about 7 years. So that's where that 7-year cycle comes from. But everything in your body is constantly, yes, regenerating and dying, and but it happens at a variety of intervals. But the longest one is around 7 years.
Nice.
Which is where that comes from.
Then the sentence of "you are what you eat" is in essence true. Do you believe that it's true?
It's very much true. Like, this is the thought experiment I run people through who are like hesitant to the idea. I'm very much the idea. I'm like, we're all one. Like, you and I are the same. We're all made of the same stuff. We are made of the earth, right? We're just here in the human form for a temporary amount of time, which is great that we get this opportunity. Wow, but that's a hard concept for a lot of people to wrap their head around. But so I'm like, okay, let's do a thought experiment where I'm like, at what point does the food you eat become you? Because people are thinking of food as separate from them, right? It's separate from me, but you eat it at some point, and like that becomes, right? If you eat protein, it gets broken down to amino acids. You take those amino acids and you repair muscle cells. It helps you with a bunch of electrical signaling. It helps you with hormonal signaling. Like, that stuff becomes you literally at some point. So was it ever really separate from you? And then at what point does it not become you anymore? The same thing with water, right? Water is, we're 65% water, 70% water, something like that. Yeah. So we're constantly taking in water. We're constantly excreting water. It comes out of our mouths. We sweat it out. It comes out of our urine. Like, at what point is that water, does it become you? At what point does it not become you?
Is it
like,
so
it's
diluted?
It's all just stuff. And, it's all like, we all use it. I don't know. It's just a way to think of it, where it's like, can you really determine the point where this separate food becomes you? I can't find that point where, oh, after 20 chews, it becomes me. After 45 minutes of digestion, it becomes me. I don't know.
No, that's interesting. Yeah, I think it's a simple concept, but still hard to understand. Maybe. Yeah, I think there's been an incredible conversation, Parker. I love the value that you're bringing to the world with your business, helping people to do good in their life on a personal level, from health to community to all the other aspects in between. So I really congratulate you for doing that. Now, if some of our listeners want to reach out to you or connect with you, or even have you as their health coach, how can they best find you, connect with you?
Sure. Hopefully you'll be able to link to the website, but it's In Touch Health Performance, or if you can search my name, Parker Condit, that URL also takes you to the same website. So either of those. You can find me on Instagram. I believe my handle for that business is Parker Condit Health. Hopefully you can just link to that in the show notes. I think those are probably the two best ways to reach me.
Yeah, and then people should listen to your podcast as well. Can you talk a bit more about that, or how it was born?
Yeah, that was based on wanting to have conversations like this with good people, where I think health is not just this very narrow thing. It's a very broad, meandering topic. And that's kind of what we got into today, how we talk about nutrition. There's a lot of nuance, and it has to be nuanced because people are so different from their cultural backgrounds, so their heritage. Yeah, exactly. So the podcast is called Exploring Health, Macro to Micro, with Parker Condit. That one you can go to exploringhealthpodcast.com. That's where that podcast lives. It's on Spotify, Apple, all the major podcast networks. And yeah, you were I think you were episode 16, 18, something like that. So yeah, that's a very good episode. People should go check out.
Thank you for saying that. Well, Parker, I really enjoyed our time here together. Thank you for coming on. And I wish you the best of luck with your business endeavors.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. It's been a fun conversation, and thank you for having me on.
Take care. Bye-bye.